Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. My wife and I continue our conversation with Virginia about our son's health journey and how rest empowers us to begin healing. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Jonathan, Amanda, thank you for joining me for the second part of an extraordinary experience that we've shared during the course of these last few years. As we covered last week, my history with both of you is very long, and it began at Cancer Center for Healing and Center for New Medicine when I worked with your parents, Amanda, and then they hired me to work with all of their 8 children and their spouses at different times. And Jonathan, I had the joy of watching you heal over the course of several years. And it's an incredible honor to have you producing our podcast. And it's a beautiful thing to experience how life unfolds in such mysterious ways. But to also have the honor and the privilege of obviously meeting, knowing sweet Hudson and walking alongside the two of you in this extraordinary journey of healing. But I'd like to pick up where we left off so our listening audience can have context, because I want to give people hope. We always, Jonathan and Amanda, as you all know, we're about giving people hope, and specifically helping them displace confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in many facets of their life, whether it's spiritual, emotional, or physical, so they can experience the freedom of wholeness. And so this is such a practical, tangible story, I think, that I hope people can draw from.
That's been my experience, too, of people who have gone to a Day of Rest, the 40 Days of Rest course online, or working with you, is that there's so much hope that they didn't have previously.
Yes.
So as we share the timeline and the physical symptoms that Hudson experienced, we want to highlight the distinction between the laws of nature, the things that govern the body, the principles of rest, and then the modalities that we chose to employ throughout the pilgrimage, because a modality is limited, right? The principles of rest are limited in that they never change. They are there. They're reliable. The modalities, they come and go.
They're dependable, right? They're steadfast. Yes. You can take them to the bank.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in 2020, we welcomed 2 children into our family, one through adoption and one biologically. And our healthy, thriving 2-year-old boy, out of the blue, he started having grand mal seizures. So we went through all of the conventional medical processes to investigate why he would be having these. So we did all the normal EEG blood work, and there was no root cause that began to come to the surface. So we heard almost like verbatim the same thing from each practitioner of, there's no known cause. So let's give him this and let's hope it stops. Mm-hmm. We don't know what's happening, so let's just mask the problem and hopefully it'll go away.
And I just wanted to give people context that you're talking about 100 seizures a week by now. Mm-hmm. Things escalated out of control. I think we touched on that in the last segment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But for those who just may be jumping in, so you saw a number of specialists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I just realized this too, in that principle of like, hey, let's just cover this up and hopefully it'll go away, right? That's the anatomy of dissent, right? To cover, hide, blame.
That's right. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Mm. So we found a local functional neurologist and began working to help support his body through the natural ability that it has to heal through functional neurological treatments. So we began to use diet, supplementation to help support his body. And all at the same time, we were looking at what could be the spiritual constitution, the emotional constitution of the dis-ease that was showing up in his body. So one principle of German New Medicine that we began to employ is there's nothing wrong with his body, right? It's doing what it's designed to do. So let's observe and unpack what it's telling us. What's the special biological program that is running, and what can we do to help aid it and support it in its healing?
That's so much easier said than done.
Yeah.
In reality, when you see your child out of the blue fall over and start convulsing, you say, what's wrong? And what we've been learning in new depths is, in a way, that's really not what's wrong. It's, okay, the body is doing what it's designed to do. And obviously we don't want a seizure, but what is actually going on here? And what is the body telling us through this seizure versus getting into fear and that other perspective of being at odds.
Rid of this.
Yeah.
And
being at odds.
Rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the first thing we all think of is, how do we make this go away? We got to make this stop.
Yes.
And I think the approach you both had to take was, and we take here, obviously every day at R.E.S.T, is, wait, what's causing this? And what is the body trying to tell us?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that brings to mind the statement that you often make, Virginia, that healing isn't about finding a cure. It's about stepping into greater measures of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And as you do, the body's natural processes come online. And often what we see then is healing in the physical body.
Yeah. And again, that sounds easy, but the emotional pilgrimage of that requires courage and vulnerability, because as we know, we have resources, right? Biofeedback and neurofeedback resources that'll give us a narrative of what the body's holding on to. And I know you're going to get into that a little bit, but sometimes when we see in black and white things that we don't talk about, we don't want anybody to know, or things that we'd forgotten about, that we thought were buried so deep in our shame and our subconscious or unconscious mind.
Or things that are buried generationally too.
That's right. Or generational things. But when they pop up and there they are in black and white, it's still, the capacity for people to heal really depends on their willingness to do something about what they just read.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just acknowledging, wow.
Yeah. And I would say, as a parent navigating this with a child and knowing his story didn't begin at home, it began in the home of his parents' parents' parents, there's the personal responsibility for us as we unpack this, where I think prior to R.E.S.T and understanding these natural laws and these principles, it would have been easy to focus all the attention on him. And yes, at the end of the day, our desire is that the seizures stop and that he does experience wholeness. And in that process, it requires us to take a deep dive and a hard look at what's going on in us and what are these narratives, the psychology, our psychology that became his biology.
Yeah, exactly. And what's the culture in the home, and how are you interacting with one another, and looking into your own family systems. A doctor just can't do that in the 7, 15, 20 minutes they spend with you. They're not even trained to do that, frankly.
Yeah.
They take a history, I suppose, which I know you're going to get into that, but they don't have time to unwrap that history, that government, to become educated themselves and educate you as to what the connections would be. But I know you're going to talk more about that.
Yeah. Because as we talked in the last episode, as we realized that there was a spiritual constitution to this, an emotional constitution, and a physical constitution to this disease, we began to look at what could be a spiritual constitution. And that took us through a historical looking back at different narratives in the family. And what was beautiful about these principles of rest, it allowed us to look at them with curiosity and wonder instead
Great
of from
word.
a place of judgment. Instead of like, oh, this person did this or did that. It was like, okay, this was a decision that was made and it is what it is. So what do we do next? It became a really powerful tool to step out of a place of judgment, and even out of a place of judgment towards ourselves as well. So we began to see the spiritual history of this state of disease, and which helped us step into a place of governing, which what's the definition of governing?
Yeah. Direct control and restraint. And I like what you said, curiosity without judgment, just curiosity so we can problem solve, right? It changes the dynamics of everything. The doctors don't have the time or the resources to do that. They're not educated to investigate root causes. And because they're not educated and they're not trained in that, they're not able to give you a comprehensive diagnosis, treatment, or cure, if you will, following their model. So the parents bear the weight. People today, I think there's so much information out there. We have access to so much information that I think that's why I'm so thankful you were willing to have this conversation with me, because people need hope and they need to know how tangible and accessible and relevant these resources are to really address physical, emotional, and spiritual ailments.
And that was one thing that you reminded us of in this, which was a teaching from Catherine Dang, actually, about the history, the government, and the education of a thing. So typically when you go to a conventional practitioner, they own that, right?
Yes.
You know, well, we know your history. We know what you're supposed to do. So go and do this. With the principle of rest is you own that. The truth is that is yours. You have the history. You have the power to govern. And then you can choose how to move forward from there.
And there's a wealth of information. And I know you're going to share many resources with people today, but just YouTube, you can find the work, The 5 Biological Laws of Dr. Hammer.
Yep.
You can find Catherine Dang's website and resources to understand why working from a place of universal principles and reasoning through them is instrumental in really, in my opinion, helping you understand who and what is governing everything. It doesn't matter if it's history, politics, economics, or these medical issues. So I'm excited for you to delve deep into this with us. I know we don't have time to get into a lot of detail, but you can give us a sound overview of how these things we're talking about that may seem a little bit abstract, but you guys can show us.
So I think of one day that you and I, Virginia, had a conversation. It was a pretty brief conversation just about history, government, education. And you brought the application to the conventional
Hudson
line of thought with Hudson, and just reminded me that a conventional practitioner is taught that they are the ones that own this. But with Hudson and with each of our situations, we are the ones that is ours to govern. That is part of our responsibility. And just that brief reminder was so helpful. Then fast forward a few hours, I ended up having an appointment with Hudson's pediatric neurologist. And I was able to show up more empathetically and listen to what she had to say, not from a combative place, but actually with compassion and with curiosity. There was a lot of fear and anxiety that she was expressing, and it allowed me to not be reactive and to agree with the fear, but to filter out the knowledge that she was coming to the table with and what I wanted to do with that and how I was going to govern with that. And it just that simple reminder that Hudson's story is ours to govern, and we choose to go to a hospital or go to a doctor or another practitioner to glean from the wisdom, the knowledge, the resources that they have. And at the end of the day, this is ours to govern.
Yeah, it's not the end all. You have information, you have they don't even have time to take your history, and they don't understand it in the context of anything than Western training. Okay, take us through what happened.
Yeah, so Hudson's seizures continued to develop, and the more Band-Aids would be thrown at it, it was almost like new problems would begin to surface with the seizures. Different types of seizures would begin to appear. So as we began to look a little bit more closely at what we can do to help him, we remembered some of the things that we learned from the 40 days of rest. And here's a great resource and tool that a lot of people can access. The wisdom of Dr. Cowden as he taught about different things like EMFs and heavy metals and how they can cause various states of dis-ease in the body. So we began to look into what was potentially causing these, and what began to surface was that he was highly toxic. And so we started to address these toxins, these heavy metals, and we even found out one thing that might not be on a lot of people's radar is parasites. And so we began to look at how we can help support his body in getting rid of all of these toxins. And
the parasites feed on heavy metals, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So toxins and heavy metals are attractive to parasites and make your environment hospitable. So they just work together in tandem.
And we began to look again at the emotional constitution of this. We saw, okay, there is a clear narrative here that his body is carrying. And there was a particularly rough day. He had had multiple seizures, and we realized that this was an intellectual devaluation, right? This is the narrative. And so you actually did work with Amanda on this using biofeedback.
Yes, I remember that. And by the way, if I remember correctly, we did the scans while he slept.
Yeah.
As we had started to help him to flush toxins out of his body and parasites out of his body, a lot of the things that we were doing was not working.
Yeah, you were doing the protocols, but no parasites were coming out.
Right. And things were seemed to be just getting stirred up. And so in that, there was some escalation of seizures, and there was the myoclonic jerks and other things as well.
And as soon as we addressed the narrative of an intellectual devaluation, that was it. It was like, what was going on in Amanda's constitution while Hudson was in the womb?
Yeah.
And so when we looked at the intellectual devaluation of like, oh, I should have known, or I should have seen this coming, as soon as Amanda was able to resolve that using the aid of biofeedback tools, she was able to let go of that. And then we were able to help Hudson let go of that as well. And the very next time that we started his protocol back up, he began to flush everything.
That was amazing, because I remember
toxins.
it was from one day to another. And Amanda, if I recall correctly, you and Jonathan were so sleep deprived, exhausted, tired, just beyond exhaustion, just fatigue beyond, to the point where you feel numb. And I'll never forget, you cried most of that session. And then as that night while he was sleeping.
Yeah, I went and talked to him and told him about the work that I had done and about this I should have known, I should have seen this coming narrative I had been holding on to, and let him know that I let go of that and he could let go of that too. And it was just night and day. Everything started flushing.
Yeah, I remember you said they're like 12 inches long.
Oh, yeah.
The worms that came out of him were in the hundreds of thousands. Is that correct? There was a hiccup there for a little bit in terms of the seizures, the episodes. And it was from the eggs left behind.
Yes. And with parasites, the bug killers won't kill off any eggs. So he had had such a large infestation for such a long period of time that we've had to kill off adult worms and let new worms hatch and kill them off and go through that cycle several times. And there's definitely been an uptick of abnormal brain activity as that has happened, for sure.
Wow. It's almost hard to believe with the seizures were the parasites feasting off the heavy metals that were present in your body during pregnancy. You had some fillings removed, if I recall correctly.
So as a teenager, I ended up with 18 amalgam fillings in my mouth, and they were there for about 15 years. And actually, as my mom and dad went through their cancer journeys, they got theirs removed, and that was in the process. I learned that I needed to get mine removed. And so we started working on that, and it was a process of a couple years. It's not a cheap endeavor, but so I got them all removed, and actually the dentist that removed them, I remember every time I would go in, he would look at me and say, "I can't believe you're walking in here." And he'd shake his head at some point in the appointment and just sit back and say, "With the amount of mercury you had in your body for this long," he said, "you should have some massive ailment, some disease." And at that time, I was taking a binder with the removal, but was not aware that the accumulation of the mercury over all of those years had settled deep into my tissues. And so what I really could have done at that time was do a deep detox, and I didn't. And so then fast forward, I got pregnant with Hudson. And then as we were starting to discover, I think toxicity, heavy metals are an issue here. And sure enough, the mercury in his body was off the charts. And again, had no awareness. I knew that I needed to get them removed before getting pregnant. So I did that. I did what I thought was enough. And since then have realized that there was definitely more I could have done. And that has played a big part in the seizures for him.
That's why getting this information out, I think, is so important. We don't know what we don't know. And we're all becoming educated. I think on these matters, there's so much information out there today.
Yeah. And to that point, too, from the 40 Days of Rest, one thing that I guess we did that 4 years ago or more.
Wow,
that
it's been
that
long.
Yeah. Yeah. We remembered one of the things that we learned on the 40 Days of Rest call through Dr. Cowden that was really key to Hudson being able to begin to heal as well. So it was more than just one thing. Yes, the parasites were part of it. Yes, the heavy metals were part of it. Yes, the toxins were part of it. But there was also another category of electropollution that we began to address as well.
Wow. It was extraordinary to watch you both walk through this. And the things we all learned as a result of it has been fascinating. We'll pick up on the EMF discussion in the next segment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.